Well, everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the iPad 5th generation and see how this particular iPad holds up in 2024. Now, the thing I would definitely tell you is that this particular iPad is a very interesting device when it comes down to it. It's definitely not the first iPad I'd recommend people to buy anymore, but this was a very interesting iPad that was still up, software supported up until like a year and a half ago. So I will tell you, if you want to pick up some iPads that I would recommend buying this year, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of the iPad 5th generation, this is a very good looking iPad for the most part, and it definitely doesn't look ugly or anything like that. It's still a fairly premium feeling and fairly premium looking iPad for the most part. On the front, this iPad has a 9.7-inch IPS LCD panel. Much like every other iPad that's ever came out, it has a very high resolution display and it looks very good. I think for the most part, like if I'm going to go ahead and buy some sort of an iPad, this thing looks very good, and that is something that I actually like a lot about this particular iPad. You are getting like somewhat of a retina display. I mean, this thing is, it doesn't have true tone though, which can be kind of annoying, but otherwise it's a very good looking panel. You have quite a bit of bezel around the whole entire iPad, so that's like one thing to keep in mind. And the front facing camera, you have the home button with touch ID sensor on the front too. And I will tell you, overall, it is a good looking iPad nonetheless. Like if I'm going to go ahead and buy some sort of an iPad, it definitely doesn't look bad and it definitely doesn't look ugly. Like I definitely do think this thing looks very, very good for the most part, which is really cool. On the bottom of this iPad, you do have your Lightning port, which is great. And you do have your headphone jack as well. So you can go ahead and plug this thing into Lightning. You can plug this thing with a headphone jack and listen to audio. So you have that type of capability as well. And it's not even that thick of an iPad. It is fairly thin, which is a pretty cool thing going on here too. Now on the back side of this iPad, we do have this kind of like flat back to it. So it's completely flat. The camera setup on the top left corner is completely flush as well. And you have the Apple logo in the center, and that's kind of all you have. And that's something I really like about this particular iPad, is that even though it's, fairly old, came out in 2017, this thing doesn't feel or look like a super old or ugly iPad. This thing still looks very, very good. And that's something that I actually like a lot as well. So if I'm going to, again, buy some sort of an iPad, this thing definitely looks and feels pretty premium. And that's something I like a lot about it. The thing with this particular iPad though, is that its price tag can be kind of deceiving. I kind of hinted at this. I mean, it's kind of done getting software support, but because this thing is so cheap, a lot of people probably will look at this particular iPad from a price tag standpoint and consider picking it up. I will tell you though, if I were you, I don't know if this would be the first iPad I'd recommend people to buy. There's definitely significantly way more iPads I'd recommend people to buy than this thing. But like I said, the price tag can be kind of deceiving. Some people may look at this iPad and be like, oh my goodness, like I need to buy it or whatever. But the price tag again can be kind of deceiving, and that's one thing to keep in mind. On top of that, I don't think this thing supports any Apple Pencils. So if you're wanting to go ahead and buy an iPad that supports an Apple Pencil, this thing is not going to be giving you that type of capability either, which can be kind of a sad thing. So again, if you're going to want some sort of an iPad that supports it, again, this thing is not really going to be giving it to you there either. So that's kind of another thing to keep in mind there, on top of all the other things that I talked about. So from that perspective alone, on the exterior, price tag, and the feature set, that kind of covers it up there. Now, in terms of the camera side of things, this device on the back side has an 8 megapixel standard camera, and on the front has a 1.2 megapixel standard camera. The thing I can definitely tell you about this particular camera set is that, it's a very, very good camera. I think this is a very solid lens, and I think this in and of itself is for how old this iPad is, it's a decent camera, and I like that this thing even has a camera built inside of it. But as you may have probably guessed it and probably suggested it, it really is, it's basically an iPhone 5S camera. That's like the best way I can put it. It is an iPhone 5S camera that you're getting inside of this particular iPad. So I don't know if you're okay with that, and I don't know if you'd want that on this particular device. Like if I'm going through and if I'm buying some sort of a new iPad, I definitely want it to have a lot more capability, and especially from the camera side, I would love for it to basically have a really nice camera. This thing, on the other hand, really isn't giving you that, and some things that it's missing on this camera that the newest iPads have is missing out on any additional lenses. So there's no ultra-wide or telephoto lenses. You're also not getting any LiDAR sensors that the newer iPads have. And on top of that, you're not getting any of the other cool features that a lot of other iPads have, and you're also not even getting 4K at 60 on the front or the back. Those are some very limited features, and you're not getting center stage. That's available on the base model iPads out now, like the iPad 9. You're not getting that on this, type of iPad either. So in and of itself, it's not terrible, but when you start comparing it against the latest and greatest generation, you are going to start definitely seeing some pretty big differences here. And that can kind of be a problem. If you're somebody who definitely wants the, newest iPad that has a lot more capability, this thing may not be the one for you. This thing's going to be definitely giving you a limited experience. And that's the problem when you're kind of getting these types of iPads that are slightly older. So that in and of itself, again, is another very big thing going on here for this particular iPad as well. Now, on top of that, from the software side of things, as I mentioned before, this is also probably one of the bigger problems going on for this iPad right now, or it can be a pro depending on how you look at it. So the problem with this particular iPad is that it's done getting software support. So it stopped getting software on like iOS 16, so 16.7.5. So with that being said, it's pretty much limited. There's not really too much we can do about it from that perspective. But on the other side, okay, is that it did stop at iOS 16.7.5, and it's really not that old of a version of software. Like iOS 16.7.5 isn't really that old, and I think that's a really cool thing going on for this particular device. Like if you're wanting to go ahead and buy some sort of like newer type of iPad, well, like, you can get an iPad that's on iOS 17 or iPadOS 17, but iPadOS 16 is not that old, and it's still getting some security updates here and there. So there's kind of good news associated with this as well, if you're really into it. But even then, it's kind of a reach, and I think you're probably better off if you don't even do something like that. But that's kind of what I'm thinking of from like a software perspective, is that it can be a pro, it can be a con, but this iPad, regardless of the way you look at it, it's not going to be supported for that much longer as far as I can tell either. So that in and of itself is another big thing going on here too. Performance-wise, this thing is giving you that Apple A9 chip inside with 2 gigabytes of RAM. And the thing I'll definitely tell you with this particular phone, or this particular iPad, is that it is still like a decent performing iPad for the most part. It is giving you basically the same chipset as the iPhone 6s, and it's almost the same exact performance as the iPhone 6s regardless. And that is something that is very cool going on for this particular iPad, because you can go ahead and basically pick up an iPad of this caliber, and it's still going to be like perfectly fine for the most part. So from a performance perspective, and from everything all across the board, you're going to be getting like a pretty decent performing iPad. Again, when compared to itself. If you're comparing this iPad against all the other iPads that came out after it, then there's probably going to be some problems, right? You're probably not going to appreciate maybe how slow this iPad is at some times. They can be a little slow here and there, of course, because you're only getting 2 gigs of RAM compared to like the 8 or 16 that we're getting on the latest iPads. On top of that, we're getting like the M1 chipsets nowadays and all these other types of, advantages for these newer iPads. So there's still a lot of reason to buy a newer iPad over this thing. But for from a very basic performance level, like type of, viewpoint, it's really not that terrible if I'm being honest. So to kind of sum up this whole entire video, what I will definitely tell you, I definitely would look at a phone or an iPad like the iPad 5th generation, and I would definitely say it's a fairly good performing iPad. There's really not a lot to complain about here, and I would say for the most part, for its age, it's very surprising. But when you factor out the age, there's really a lot of stuff to complain about if I'm being honest. It's outdated with software. The display isn't really that good anymore. The cameras aren't that great. The performance isn't really that great. So you're just getting kind of a cheap iPad that's already done getting software support. If it's a really big deal to you, then go for you don't have to buy this thing. If it's not a big deal to you, then maybe you could buy this thing and be okay with it. But if I were you, I would recommend buying either an iPad 8th generation or an iPad 9. At the bare minimum, those iPads will still be giving you Apple Pencil support, very good displays, better displays than this thing, and software support for at least like the next couple of years. This thing, on the other hand, it's probably not really worth it if I'm being completely honest. So that kind of covers it up there. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.